daughter of Baha'u'lláh, Bahiyyih Khanum, known as the greatest holy leaf, lived a life of suffering and exile. As a little girl, she experienced her father's imprisonment in the Black Pit of Tehran, and as a young woman, the death of her brother Mirza Mu'ayyid in the Most Great Prison. But her life-changing crisis occurred as a teenager when, in August of 1868, Baha'u'lláh was exiled for the fourth time, this time from Adrianople in Turkey to Akka in Israel, although at the time none of the Holy Family knew where they were headed. And all this was due to the machinations of the unfaithful brother of Baha'u'lláh, Mirza Yahya, and also to the bigoted religious enemies in Turkey. Bahiyyih Khanum said she had been a healthy young girl before this voyage, but after, at the age of 16, she was never well and healthy again. The following account of the exile to Akka is in Bahiyyih Khanum's own words. In a small Turkish steamer, we, 72 persons, were crowded together in unspeakable conditions. There was an appalling smell, and for 11 days of horror, we were with prisoners who were dirty beyond description. There was no place in which we could lie down in that vessel. Moreover, in the hurry, distress, and uncertainty of the moment, we neglected to provide food for the voyage. A few loaves of bread and a little cheese brought by one of the friends was all the food we had for 5 indescribable days to Alexandria, Egypt. Our lack of food had reduced us to a seriously weak state of health. Most of us became very ill indeed, and what with hunger, fright, and grief, we were almost bereft of reason. Arriving in Alexandria, again rumors spread of our immediate separation from Baha'u'llah and from each other. One friend, in his distress, threw himself from the ship into the sea. Fortunately, he was rescued. For the entire difficult journey, Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha had tried to cheer us, and now Baha'u'llah asked the half-drowned Baha'i, "Why did you jump into the sea? Did you wish to give a banquet to the fishes?" After a voyage of about 2 days from Alexandria in Egypt, we were landed at Haifa, all sick from hunger or from eating foul food. The horrible sufferings of the voyage had reduced me almost to the point of death. I myself was a healthy woman up until this time, but upon taking this voyage to Akka, since then I have never been well. At length, we arrived at Haifa. The heat of that month was overpowering. We were put into a small sailboat for the journey to Akka. Although only a distance of 10 miles, there was no wind for the short journey, which then took 8 hours. There was no shelter or shade from the burning rays of the hot summer sun. And despite the calm wind, the water was very rough, and nearly all became seasick. We spent 8 hours of positive misery. But as the steamer approached Akka on August 31st, Baha'u'llah relates that the conquest on high greeted him as the manifestation of God and his entry through the door of hope. The door of hope was the phrase the prophet Hosea had given to Akka in the Old Testament when he said, "I will give Akka for a door of hope." Just as the psalmist David had sung, "Lift up your heads, O ye gates, be lifted up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in." Who is the King of glory? The Lord of hosts. He is the King of glory. Thus, with the world unknowing, biblical prophecies were being daily fulfilled without Baha'u'llah's efforts. He had arrived in the Holy Land in the nest of the prophets. Abdu'l-Baha has said that, quote, "It is difficult to understand how Baha'u'lláh could have been obliged to leave Persia and to pitch his tent in the Holy Land, but for the persecution of his enemies, his banishment, and his exiles. Upon our arrival, writes Baha'u'lláh, we were welcomed with banners of light, whereupon the voice of the Spirit cried out, saying, soon will all that dwell on earth be enlisted under these banners. Soon will all that dwell on earth be enlisted under these banners. What a wonderful confirmation of the fruits to come from all this suffering. However, the worst was yet to occur. Akka was the penal colony of the Ottoman Empire, an unhealthy town to which the empire's most hardened criminals were sent. The idea was that Baha'u'llah's influence could not spread from such a pestilential city, where the air was so poisonous that a local legend said that any bird flying over the city would drop dead from its stench. Hope was that Baha'u'lláh would die in such a plague-infested place. Worse than the pestilential atmosphere, Bahiyyih Khanum continues in her account, was the atmosphere of hatred that greeted us. The local Muslims had been told in the mosque that we were the enemies of God, of humanity, and of Islam, sources of sedition and dangerous criminals. The local Muslims were commanded to shun us as outcasts. All the townspeople had assembled to greet our arrival with threats and curses. This caused us fresh anxiety and misery. We were terrified of the unknown. Some said that we would be put in dungeon and chains. Others that we would be thrown into the sea. The most horrible jests and jeers were hurled at us as we were marched through the streets to this dreadful of prisons. Baha'u'lláh was not allowed to leave the boat until all his family had landed. The crowd had saved its worst abuse for the manifestation of God. Imagine, if you can, the overpowering impression made by all this upon the mind of a young girl, such as I was then. Can you wonder that I am so serious and that my life is different from those of my countrywomen? From the terrible sufferings and privations of the journey, we were nearly all sick. Worst of all, perhaps, Baha'u'lláh and myself. When we entered the barracks, the massive door was closed upon us, and the great iron bolts thrown home. I cannot find words to describe the filth and stench of that vile place. We were nearly up to our ankles in mud in this room into which we were led. The damp, close air and the excretions of the soldiers combined to produce horrible odors. Then, being unable to bear more, I fainted. As I fainted, those about me caught me before I fell. But because of the mud and filth, there was no place for me to be laid down. On one side of the room was a man weaving a mat for the soldiers. One of our friends took this mat and I was placed upon it. There was a pool of water on the dirt floor in which the mat maker had been moistening his reeds. Some of this water was dipped up and strained and put to my lips. I swallowed a little and revived, but the water was so foul that my stomach rejected it, and I fainted again. In the meantime, my brother Abdul-Baha had disappeared. He was away for hours, and our hearts became filled with anxiety for his safety. When he returned, we learned that he had slipped out of the prison and gone down to assist in the landing of the remainder of the friends. Baha'is were all brought to the barracks together and lodged on the ground floor. Among them were the women and children, almost dying of hunger and parched with thirst. My brother begged to be permitted to go out for food and water. The soldiers replied, if you set foot outside this room, we will skewer you on a spear. The mothers who had babes at breasts had no milk for them for lack of their own food and drink. So the babes could not be pacified or quieted. The larger children were screaming for food and water and could not sleep or be soothed. The women were fainting. Under these conditions, my brother spent the first part of the night passing about the distressed friends, trying to pacify them, and appealing to the soldiers not to be so heartless as to allow women and children to suffer so. Finally, about midnight, he succeeded in getting a message to the governor. We were then sent a little water and some cooked rice. But the rice was so full of grit and dirt and smelled so foul that only the strongest stomach could keep it down. The water the children drank, but the rice only the strongest could bear to eat. Later on, some of our people, in unpacking their goods, found some pieces of the bread which had been brought from Turkey, and a little sugar. With these, a dish was prepared for Baha'u'lláh, who was very ill. When it was taken to him, he said, "I command you to take this to the children." So it was given to them, and they were somewhat quieted. Finally, my brother succeeded in getting permission to send out a servant, guarded by 4 soldiers, to buy food. The servant procured some provisions, yet we were all so poor that we could buy but little, and thus we were still badly off for food. The provisions thus being insufficient, my father, Baha'u'lláh, gave his own share to my brother for the people. Thereafter, when the supply of provisions was insufficient, and he learned of it, Baha'u'lláh would take only bread and water. The arrival at the penal colony of Akka, far from proving the end of his afflictions, was but the beginning of a major crisis. Know thou, Baha'u'lláh has written, that upon our arrival at this spot, we chose to designate it the most great prison. Though previously subjected in another land, Tehran, to chains and fetters, we yet refuse to call it by that name. Ponder thereon, O ye endued with understanding. Arriving in Akka, Baha'u'lláh said to Abdul-Baha, "Now I concentrate on my work of writing commands and counsels for the world of the future. To thee I leave the province of talking with and ministering to the people. I have finished with the outer world. Henceforth, I meet only with the disciples." And of course, the Kitabi Aqdas, the most holy book, Book of Laws, was a chief fruit in Akka of all this suffering by Baha'u'lláh. Just as 53 years later, upon the passing of Abdul-Baha, the fruit of Bahiyyih Khanum's suffering was her guiding the affairs of the Baha'i world, while the young, grief-stricken Shoghi Effendi was in isolation, steeling himself spiritually for the guardianship, thus confirming Bahiyyih Khanum's station as the pre-eminent woman of the Bahá'í Dispensation. The journey to Akka, like the journey of life, is best summed up in Bahiyyih Khanum's own words. "Those who have been trained and educated in the school of God," she writes, "even when coming to such a pass, are resignation itself. Such is the way of those who are attracted to his kingdom. Time and again, experience has shown in every age, Baha'u'llah's assurance has been verified, that calamity's rushing rain is the greening of his planted field, and afflictions are the oil that feeds and adds to the radiance of the lamp of God." Baha'u'llah tells us that there are signs of God all around us. If we all open our spiritual eye through deep prayer, meditation, and selfless service, then in the midst of our own tribulations, perhaps we too will be able to be given what Baha'u'llah was given on approaching Akka, the vision that soon will all that dwell on earth be enlisted under these banners. Soon will all that dwell on earth be enlisted under these banners. Ya Baha'u'lláh, Ya Baha'u'lláh, Ya Baha'u'lláh.